Hello and welcome to the Dark Bestiary, Chapter 2, The Gorm. My name's Fen, and in the Dark Bestiary series, we take a deep dive into everything to do with a particular monster within the game Kingdom Death Monster. The monster in Monster. In these videos, we have a look at the lore, the physiology of the creatures, so we can kind of get an idea of how they fit into the world. Then we have a look at any impact they might have on the settlement, how it feels to hunt them, how they change the texture of the hunt phase, a dive through everything to do with the showdown, the meat of the monster, and speaking of meat, we'll then take a look at the resources so you can get an idea of what the reasons are to hunt a particular monster over any other. So before we get into this one, a little bit of housekeeping. As always, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed and you like this, subscribe. It helps me make more. Speaking of helping make more, if you really like what I do and you want to support more of it, I have a Patreon, link in the description below if you want to support monthly. There's also, this channel now has memberships, which I might do something with when we get a reasonable amount of them, or if you're like, I just like what you did but I can't afford to support, there's also a coffee for like a one-off donation. Otherwise, looking, watching, that's all greatly appreciated. Other thing of general housekeeping, when I get into the lore sections, unless I'm directly reading from the book or I'm quoting or paraphrasing from something which I'll reference, I'm not talking about any gospel here. There's a lot of gaps in Kingdom Death. There's a lot of spaces for you to fill in things. I'm going to be taking a fair bit of artistic license in the opening section of this, where we talk about the Gorm in general, filling in a bunch of gaps and everything. So it's just a bit of fun. Hopefully builds a bit of atmosphere as well. But wherever I can, I try and base those things on the evidence that's in print. That's like my primary driving force. What I put together on the monsters, I take it as long as it's been put into print on the web store, where generally done when products come for sale, or within one of the printed documents that get out to us. That's the stuff that I really take these all from. So anyway, that's that. Let's get into the Gorm. And before we really take a dive into this creature, I actually just want to express a lot of appreciation of this and talk a little bit about what I do know in regards to the development, and also sort of the impressions I get from it. So I don't know if I've said this before, I think I have, but if I haven't, or if you aren't aware of it, the Gorm is the reason I play Kingdom Death. I saw the Gorm model and I picked one up. I had a Gorm expansion before the actual core box got to me. So this is a monster that I have a lot of affection for. I think it is really well done and really greatly put together. I think it is the second best of the first generation monsters. That's like everything that came before the Gambler's Chest. I think this is the second best monster out of all of them, as a complete picture. For the record, the best one for me is the Sunstalker, which is entirely an Adam project. I'm looking forward to getting to talk about that. Very exciting. And also People of the Sun. It's going to be a fun video to talk about, which is coming sometime later this year. I'm alternating these videos with those. But the Gorm, according to Adam, is all Anna Poots. And I gotta say, it does, it does show. Anna is, I think, the designer out of the entire team who hit the ground running with like the greatest capability, and that's no insult to the others at all. I just think Anna had a vision that came together a lot faster. We know that the first story, the introduction for like how you play the game came from Anna, and that is just one of the best tutorials in any game ever. So I always have a lot of time for Anna's designs. I think they're fantastic, but I think that the Gorm is like peak out of everything Anna did in the first generation. This is the best. As for what it is, well, thematically, the Gorm is a mixture of a pachyderm, specifically an elephant, and a baby, essentially. There's a couple of other elements, of course. Most of the creatures in Kingdom Death have inspirations from deep sea creatures, partly because deep sea creatures are really weird looking, and also because Kingdom Death is a world with no sun, no natural light, which is a lot like the deepness of the abyss. And you can normally find aquatic elements in almost every single monster in Kingdom Death, in a differing degree. For example, the White Lion has sets of shark teeth. The Gorm has a lure at the top of its head at the front, as we'll see later. That is apparently a modified migrated testicle. And it also has a large open jaw, very reminiscent of deep sea fish like the anglerfish, capable of swallowing prey whole. But the big part of it is definitely the baby. There's a lot of, I think, catharsis in this design, because there's clearly the experience of someone who's had a young child. Gorms, one of the main mechanics they have, and we'll get into it, is retching, where they throw up a vile, caustic mixture of chemicals. You can see in this picture here, this Gorm is vomiting on a bunch of stuff to generate probably sustenance, unless this is a case of like morning sickness, which it could be. But the Gorms are incredibly volatile and prone to throwing up. They also make a lot of noise, make it very difficult in the environment for the survivors in the settlement, and that's expressed in a notorious card called Gorm Climate that we'll get into. All of it, though, comes together in this really fantastic manner. A blending of elephant and baby with some alchemy sprinkled in, and then this adaptations to deep sea life. So, if you will humour me for a moment, I'm going to take us through the journey, the life cycle of one Gorm. Because one of the incredible things about this is this expansion gives us a really good insight into where Gorms come from. Not like the actual egg, we'll speculate about the origination of Gorms a bit later, but where a Gorm comes from, how it lives its life, and what happens at the end of their lifespan. And I really, really like that. There's a number of monsters that have huge mysteries, like the White Lion. There's a lot, as I talked about in the White Lion video, that digs really deeply into the background of the world. But White Lions themselves, we don't really know too much about how they live beyond speculating that they're much like our lions. Gorms, on the other hand, are one of the few creatures where we pretty much get to see the entire life cycle, the other one being, again, the Sunstalker. And I do appreciate greatly that Kingdom Death has monsters with big mysteries, like the White Lion, like the Dragon King, like the Watcher. But it also has monsters that just exist in this world, and they're a part of it. And there's not a big, huge, giant mystery to be uncovered. Although I do have a fun theory, as I mentioned. It's just that they're a creature in this world. They exist, and I think that's super cool. So let's take a journey, shall we? And we begin here in the Gorm Den. And we have our little baby Gorm. I'm going to call it a Gormlet. That's not an official term, but I think it's cute, and it kind of helps. So, as we can see, Gorms are a mammalian creature, and given that they're based on elephants, and this image here, we can assume that generally they only have one child at a time. Now, what I think is really really fascinating about this picture is if we look, this baby Gorm is visible through its mother's stomach. Obviously this Gorm looks pretty close to birth, and that's where we're going to start our journey with our little Gormlet. But we can see even here in the womb, this baby, first of all, glows. And Gorms are incredibly chemically active creatures, and they're also capable of bioluminescence. We can see an example of it up here, and we see they have a certain amount of control over it. I think when they're young, their metabolisms are incredibly active. They're really like churning over time, because of course the young Gorm needs to grow quite quickly to avoid being picked off by other predators or survivors, predators. And as such, you know, they have a very fast metabolism. They also have they're quite small, and their hide is quite thin. They don't have too much of the protective blubber that we'll see that Gorms produce later on in life. I think they glow. I do think this is not just a bit of artistic license. I think baby Gorms do actually bioluminescence quite brightly, to the point that you can see them through the mother's hide where the skin is stretched out. And that, I think, is part of the reason that Gorms in general, but this Gorm is born within a den. It's a safe space. Gorm dens are filled with lots of chemicals, toxic, dangerous chemicals produced by Gorms, making it a hostile environment for any would-be predators. We can also see that Gorms go one step further, and they build warning markers. You know, there is a clear signs of sapience and tool use within Gorms. These seem to be constructed by the Gorms as totems to scare away survivors who might try and come in to get at the vulnerable mothers and our little Gormlet. Fortunately though, our Gormlet never encounters any survivors. It isn't cut down. It gets to be born and grow up, probably quite rapidly, inside the Gorm den, protected by its mother, other mothers, and the very nature of its environment, a place where other creatures, vicious predators like, say, Spidiculus, generally wouldn't go. Eventually, and probably quite quickly, the Gormlet becomes a Gorm, grows up, and given that they're based on elephants, I think it's very likely that the Gorm has a capability to move around very quickly, pretty much from birth. That's almost an essential part of the entire thing. Also, as we can see, our little Gorm doesn't have even the nub of a lure anywhere here. We also don't see any signs of the arms that other Gorms have. Now, I don't think that these arms are parasitic arms in the way that they are with many other creatures, like the phoenix is riddled with hand parasites. I think these are a part of the Gorm because they do seem to use them for a wide variety of different tasks. We'll see as we get further on in the Gorm's lifespan, they do actually use them for tool manipulation. But our little baby doesn't have the lure, doesn't have that illumination in the dark, but I would assume during maturity this organ migrates and extends from the head and grows out and provides the lure, which gives a certain amount of illumination and also something to draw the unwary into the Gorm's giant maw. But our Gorm has grown up, and travelling with its mother, they both head out to rejoin the Gorm herd. We know Gorms travel in herds. How big, we're not entirely sure of. In game, we only ever encounter one Gorm by itself, generally because fighting multiple Gorms would probably be really dangerous, but also it's standard for hunting and for predators to try and isolate a stray member of a herd that's sick or ill or unwise in some manner. Our Gorm, though, that never happens. Our Gorm's too smart for that. Our Gorm is very capable and grows to reach sexual maturity, at which point it starts to produce some chemicals and goes into heat. Given the Gorms are based on elephants, this would be the bull elephants. Bull Gorms start to produce a thing called must. Must is a very strong pungent scent, and this is a mechanic that's present when fighting the level 2 Gorm, which represents a Gorm in the Gorm den in heat. Our Gorm, though, doesn't have to worry about that. Our Gorm mates and produces Gormlets many, many times. It lives a long and successful life and sires many offspring. Now, we don't know if Gorms are monogamous in that they pick a partner and mate for life, or if they have a bull Gorm per herd and the rest of the herd is mostly females and young, or if like Gorms mate bond for a year and then they'll pick a different one in another lantern year. We're not sure about it, but given that we find the survivors hunting a lot of Gorms wandering around by themselves, I guess maybe the herd structure is a bull Gorm and then female Gorms of various status, and then young male Gorms, young female Gorms, and some Gormlets, adolescent Gorms. I think that's more likely the structure because it explains why other Gorms are found elsewhere. Now, our Gorm, though, our Gorm is one of the strong ones. Our Gorm grows up to become the leader of its own herd. It's a Gorm with incredible status, and it sires many, many offspring. It is incredibly successful. And it lives a long life of countless lantern years. Now, we have no idea exactly how long Gorms live. Time is kind of a flat circle in the world of Kingdom Death. It's very hard to measure any sort of timescale. Survivors have absolutely no real way of measuring time beyond the concept of lantern years, which are apparently quite variable in length. I mean, a single survivor can be born and grow up to be old enough to hunt within the space of a lantern year, so it's a very stretchy concept. But our Gorm, we know, lives an incredibly long time because it becomes what is known as a ancient Gorm, and we don't see the term ancient thrown around lightly, so one can assume an ancient Gorm is incredibly old, and we have one here. If we look at this Gorm, this ancient Gorm, we can see it's grown considerably in mass. We can judge that based on the tiny size of the hands. We can also see that Gorms do partake in self-decoration. This Gorm has pierced its nose with a bone. It hangs a lantern from one of its huge, gigantic, overgrown tusks, and some skulls from this over here. I think this may be its tail. It's hard to tell for sure. But anyway, what happens is when a Gorm reaches a certain age, it becomes time for it to make what's known as the final march. Now, I postulate, based on what we know from fighting these ancient Gorms, these level 3 Gorms, that what happens is a Gorm's metabolism, which produces a vast amount of incredibly toxic chemicals, becomes less capable of producing large amounts of bile and fluid. So instead of having a lot of vomit, retch, bile that it ejects out, the stuff becomes far more concentrated. We see evidence of this in a card that is legendary status, which is only found in ancient Gorms, which can result in instant putrefaction, dissolving of a survivor who's killed by it. So I think that here, our Gorm, our old Gorm now, its metabolism slowing down, and it's starting to get clogged up with very concentrated chemicals, which in themselves it can handle to a certain degree, but they begin to form into this substance known as Gormite, which is an incredibly tough, dense substance that is valued and prized by survivors. We know that the Gorm is producing this, and at this stage it doesn't really produce it beforehand. It's a complicated and difficult process that survivors have to really learn a lot of alchemy to replicate themselves. And I think this is what causes the Gorm to start to understand that it's time for it to pass on, that its days are running out. And instinctively the Gorm takes the final march and travels across to its herd, or maybe the herd's ancestral lands, the Gorm Yard, which is based on the fable, the legend of the elephant graveyard, a place where Gorms go to spend their last days, lantern days, in the world before settling down and passing away with their ancestors, surrounded by the bones of their ancestors. And that is where our Gorm would end its journey, where any Gorm could really hope, having successfully sired many, many more Gorms, lived a long life without dying, without being slain along the way, and coming here to finally close its eyes one last time and never awaken. So that's a little journey through the life of a Gorm, and yeah, I've taken artistic liberties, but I do hope you can see how I've sort of pieced together what I think is large parts of the story. I think it's all portrayed within this expansion, and that's kind of fantastic. Now, as I mentioned before, I do think there is one mystery with regards to Gorms, and let us just go over to the miniature a moment. Whoop, there we go. So we can just have a little bit of a proper look. Don't worry about the survivors, that's for a bit later. So examining the physical nature of these Gorms, what we can see is the back half is quite strongly elephantine. Although the tail is considerably shorter, one would assume that's because there's less problems with flies and other such winged insects causing discomfort and irritation for the Gorm in the Water Kingdom Death. We know there's not. There are vermin, there are lonely ants, cyclops flies and similar, but they seem to be kind of less common, with the nightmare tick being one of the main parasites. So I assume the tail is shorter because they have less need to flick away irritants. But the big thing I wanted to talk about speculating with is when we get to the front of the Gorm, we can see that while the back legs here are very much like the elephant, with them walking essentially on tiptoes, a flattened set of tiptoes, the front two arms do actually end in hands. And as we saw in the picture of the pregnant Gorm, they are capable of not just holding them flat on the ground, but using them at least to rest against things and have a certain amount of manipulation. And given we see the ancient Gorm with jewellery, one can assume that these are capable of fine manipulation as well, because the small hands would not be capable of reaching up to the nose or hanging something off the tail. They're just not long enough. So I'm going to speculate with a little hypothesis that what Gorms are is somewhere back in time they're an aberrant deviation on survivors who embraced Gormandism, is my theory at the moment, my hypothesis. I think that maybe that's how they came to be. They embraced hedonism and consumption, and like Gormanism survivors, they grew quite large, but they went beyond that and eventually stabilized into these things. It would explain the humanoid elements that are involved within these. Of course, it could not be the case at all. They could just be a perfectly natural animal that evolved through some other method, but that's one of those fun things that's kind of nice to speculate about. Maybe originally they were survivors. Who knows? So let's get on to the various different bits and pieces now, shall we? Into the mechanics, and we're going to start with a look at the introductory event for the Gorm, this is one of the most impactful things that you will experience as a new player, and it's the one major area of caution that I do think is worth paying attention to and coming to understand, because the approaching storm has a semi-permanent impact upon your settlement. So let's look through the event and then look at the card that it creates. Okay, so the approaching storm. This happens in Lantern Year 1 as the Gorm is a Node 1 monster, meaning it's around the White Lion in challenge and difficulty. Bit higher in complexity because it is an expansion monster. The settlement's weather takes a turn for the worse, which we can see if we just look over here. You can see the falling water. A light appears on the horizon. From its origin, rolling masses of storm clouds approach the settlement, soaking everything in perpetual sheets of stale-smelling rain. Sudden flash floods, burning winds, and periods of strobing lighting continuously plague the settlement, leaving the survivors in epileptic fits. You may now hunt the Gorm, add it to the settlement record sheet, add the settlement event Gorm climate to the next Lantern Year on the timeline. Look at that a bit later. Nominate a survivor, they gain +1 insanity and brave the storm. So we can see here that the Gorms have not necessarily a psychic, but something akin to a psychic ability to impact and affect the weather. This is part of the baby element of them. Even in the settlement, in your bed, the Gorm can still disturb your sleep. So, braving the storm. On a 1/2, the nominated survivor braces themselves against the wind, struggling against the storm. A sudden bolt of blazing green lightning strikes them down. They gain the absence seizures disorder. So, a punishment, not a terrible one. Absence seizures isn't the worst disorder to get. In fact, let's just walk through it for a moment. Okay, so I have the card here in front of me. Sorry, I should have grabbed the one in the game, but let's leave it on this screen for now. The text reads, "No one knows where your mind goes when you're gone, not even you." And the mechanics are, the first time you would suffer a brain trauma each showdown, you're instead knocked down and forget a fighting art, erase it. So, obviously, once you have fighting arts, quite frustrating. Similar with knowledges. It's not ideal. This is definitely a disorder you want to remove, but this early on in the campaign, absence seizures isn't going to do too much, and of course we can mitigate that further by ensuring that our nominated survivor, who gains +1 insanity and braves the storm, is not a currently hunting survivor, which is generally a good practice. If you don't know what a table does and you're not going to read ahead, which is a very valid way to play, then it is best for you to just pick somebody who doesn't go out on hunts yet and roll on the table there and learn from the experience. And maybe they'll become someone great who can go out on hunts. Maybe they'll get hurt and affected in some way, like this absence seizures. You at least haven't risked somebody who matters. The longer you play, though, the more you'll get used to which events have these kind of negatives, so you'll be able to mitigate just appropriately through experience. On a 3, 4, 5, or a 6, the survivor stands in the torrent. Pulsing psychedelic lights strike them, bringing them to their knees. In a flash of morbid inspiration, the nominated survivor takes a stone to their own eyes. They suffer the blind severe head injury and gain +1 permanent speed. Blind, of course, is a reduction in accuracy. It's not a great severe injury to suffer from, especially because the second blind will retire you, but there are things that interact positively and negatively with blind. A blind survivor cannot have Timeless Eye. Well, they can have it, but they can't use it. But they can benefit from an eye patch, because wearing an eye patch when you're blind is mechanically badass in Kingdom Death. That's what the text says. We'll see it when we look at the Sunstalker, but yeah, that's what it is. +1 permanent speed. This is a reasonable compensation for the blind severe injury. I don't think this is a deal breaker for a survivor. I would still use a blind survivor with +1 permanent speed, depending on the kind of weapons I'm looking to use. I think like bows in particular, very beneficial with high speed. Same with spears, they don't mind being higher speed as well. So there's lots of uses for this, and you may even find at times you can actually cure blind in severe head injuries depending on the mix of expansions and events that occur. So it's not ideal, but it's something bad in exchange for something that can be good. So that's fine. On a 7, 8, 9 or a 10, the resolute survivor stands strong in the face of the oncoming storm. Struggling against the mighty winds, he gathers the settlement together to build a shelter against the sickening storms. If they have not innovated it yet, the settlement gains the Hovel innovation, and returning survivors gain +1 survival. So, Hovel's a mixed blessing. It is definitely helpful within the circumstances of fighting against the Gorm and its impacts on the settlement phase, but it also reduces your odds of getting other tier 1 innovations. Things like Symposium, Paint, Ammonia. These are all things you want to hit quite early on, and also your survival actions are tied up in there. So because Hovel puts like extra cards into the deck beyond just replacing itself, that's the negative, but Hovel is more survival, so there is a benefit to it just there. Do bear in mind that some campaigns count innovations, and when you hit a certain number, typically 5, an event is going to occur. That's campaign specific, but just bear in mind that this gets you one step there faster than you normally would if you hit this. Okay, so with all that, let's go over and look at Gorm Climate, shall we? So this will be happening in Lantern Year 2, and as a settlement event card, it'll get shuffled into the deck. If you do draw it, then you can't have double Gorm Climate. You will just have the one Gorm Climate affect you, so you get a year with just this settlement event, which is a mixed blessing. Settlement events tend to be like a modifier, a variable, like randomness, rather than actually having a positive or negative impact. So I don't mind hitting Gorm Climate if I already have Gorm Climate. It's nice to know that you're not going to lose your endeavours or have to deal with some other emergency, but likewise you do miss out on some positives. There's a tiny thing though. The returning survivors find the settlement tormented by relentless foul weather. Add Gorm Climate to the next Lantern Year on the timeline and roll 1d10. So this means Gorm Climate is not going away. You can remove Gorm Climate, we'll look at that when we get to the showdown, but until you get to the specific setup that will get rid of Gorm Climate, you're going to need to learn to live with it. Now, the truth is, this may seem like a lot to deal with, but actually it's not as big a deal as it seems. I'm perfectly happy to function under a Gorm Climate. I just have to modify my playstyle to keep it in mind. So, let's go through the results, shall we? On a 1, 2 or a 3, jagged pellets of sizzling hail rain from the sky, corroding anything they touch where they land. All resources in the settlement storage are lost. You may avoid this by dismantling an innovation, return it to the innovation deck to create a protective barrier. Okay, so the number one thing to think of is if you have no resources in your settlement storage, that's not the stuff you've brought back, that's just the settlement storage, then this has no impact. So that's the fundamental way I shift my play. I do not leave anything in the settlement storage unless I'm like, okay, I'm willing to risk it, or I cannot do anything with it, like early scrap. This is not a bad result. Now, you could also dismantle Negredo, which is a Gorm innovation that you gain for beating a Gorm, and you'll regain it by hunting the Gorm again. It's a way that some people play. I'm not interested in gaming the system to that degree. I also like to have some flexibility over what I'm hunting next and not lock myself into a loop of hunting the same thing over and over. So that's an option, but I would rather not do it. I'd rather just spend my resources and be okay with them used up, and just live like from moment to moment without saving until I get Gorm Climate dealt with. On a 4, 5, 6 or 7, the question is asked, does a set one have Hovel? So we might have Hovel for free, or we might innovate it later down the line. We certainly will innovate it eventually, but possibly not before we complete Gorm Climate if we haven't already got it. So on the yes, The survivors huddle inside as razor winds and sickening lightning pummel the settlement, +2 to endeavour results at home innovations this lantern year. So there's a few home innovations that benefit from that. Bed, for example, that's not bad. So that's okay. That's a benefit. That's 40% of the time with Hovel we get something good. So again, Gorm Climate, it's alright. On a no, the echoing cries carried on the wind wear out the returning survivors, reduce their insanity to 0, they must skip the next hunt to recover from their journey home. Not so good here, which is an argument to innovate Hovel if you get the option while Gorm Climate's still going on. This isn't a total deal breaker though. You can have stuff that's going to give survivors plus insanity when departing, and you can take this advantage to sort of spread out your XP gains and have an A and a B hunt team and alternate them. It isn't as good as just grinding the course like set of survivors with the weapon proficiencies you want up to like max out weapon proficiency as fast as possible. It does slow that down, but again, this isn't the end of the world. The sky is falling, but it's not going to kill anyone. On an 8, 9 or a 10, you're asked if you have storytelling. Kind of rare to have storytelling early on. I don't often have storytelling before I resolve the Gorm Climate, but if you do, huddled together in the howling storm, the settlement recalls stories of worse hardships they have triumphed over. You nominate a survivor with 0 hunt XP, they grow wise from the experience of their elders and gain +1 understanding. Nice, just a little bonus, that's fine. On a no, the settlement struggles against the quaking ground, linking arms to brace themselves against the storm. Nominated a survivor with 0 hunt XP, they draw strength from the settlement's determination and gain +1 courage. So again, we've now got a positive happening here. This is just categorically good for you either way. Gaining courage or understanding is fantastic. Understanding in the settlement phase is really, really good, but I'm also equally happy to get courage during the settlement phase. And note that this has to be a survivor with 0 hunt XP. That doesn't mean they have to have 0 understanding or courage to start with. So, fantastic. This means, what I'm saying, don't worry about Gorm Climate, don't fear the Reaper. You're okay. You can handle this. Spend your resources wisely the year before, and when you come back, just be aware sometimes your survivors might have to skip the next hunt. That's okay. And eventually you will overcome this and beat it. Now, quick little thing I will say. If you really, really want to introduce the Gorm to a group of new players, and you don't mind being a bit cheesy in house ruling, it's okay to leave Gorm Climate out just to reduce complexity for them while they're learning. Of course, it's best to just teach people with the pure core game as is, but if you've got experienced gamers and you know that they want a little bit of variety and your only other Node 1 option is the Gorm, maybe you consider doing this. The Gorm is like such a fantastic monster to complement the White Lion. They stick together really, really well, which is just fantastic. So don't usually go into house rules, but I thought I'd mention that's a very easy thing to do, is to just leave this off or leave this off for a while before bringing it in to help ease people in if that's the way you want to handle things. Okay, now it's time for us to, well, first of all, I wanted to just briefly highlight, if I can just find the exact number. Here we are. Gorm does actually make an appearance in the core rulebook in Hunt Event 57, Gorm's Laughter. The rhythmic wail of a Gorm's laughter reaches survivors, filling them with fear. The cackling follows the survivors, tormenting them until they reach their quarry. Place a token on every hunt board space between the survivors and their quarry. When the survivors move onto the space with a token, remove it, and all non-death survivors suffer 1 brain event damage. So we see a sense of humour in the Gorms. A twisted, mean, cruel sense of humour, but it is kind of like nice to see the creatures in the expansions appearing elsewhere, even before you might encounter them. It's very enticing to draw this hunt event and you've not fought against the Gorm and be like, what's the Gorm? What is this? That's very cool. While we're on it, a brief note on the name Gorm itself. I would really love to be able to ask Anna what inspired the name Gorm. There's like the earliest example that I know of is a Danish king from the 10th century who was known as Gorm the Old. I don't know if that's a reference to it, and I believe is fairly like well educated and versed on a whole wide variety of different things. So wouldn't be surprised if that's the source of it. All equally, given Adam's clearly heavily influenced by Games Workshop, it could be a reference to Morg Nathorg, the Blood Bowl player. It could just be a noise that a child makes. You know, it is a very soft kind of mumbly noise that a baby might make while babbling. Who knows? I think it's a really cool name. I would love to know the origin of it, and I don't. But yeah, let's briefly talk about that. So, let's get on to the Hunt Phase card, shall we? Okay, so we're going to look at the Hunt events first, and then we'll have a look at the special modifiers that occur when hunting a level 2 and level 3 Gorm. I've organised these into roughly 4 piles. The way I try and do this, hopefully I've been consistent from one video to the next, is I have random on the right and fixed on the left, and then sort of in the middle, maybe sort of a mix of it where you sort of neutral on that, and then top row are things I generally consider to be beneficial or broadly beneficial, and bottom I consider to be broadly negative. Just helps give a overall understanding of how much impact maybe the hunt phase is going to have. So we'll start over here with the fixed and positive. There should be 2. Yep. First of all, we have Horizon of Bones. The darkness ahead is filled with steady flashes of green light. Enormous piles of jagged bones forbiddingly line the horizon in an unbroken line. The inhuman, mournful laughter echoes through the air. If any survivors 5+ hunt XP and 3+ courage, you press forward, fearfully sneaking through the bone wall, and all survivors gain +1 courage. So, nice event later on. Earlier on, when nobody has these kind of milestones met, then you're just going to get a random hunt event. So, you know, fixed results. And then with Itchy Palms, the survivors come across a field of huge boulders worn on all sides with deep, smooth grooves. If any survivor has 3+ understanding, they realise the Gorms use these stones to scratch their enormous, delicate palms. Armed with these fresh tracks, they may hasten to their quarry, skipping the next hunt space. If this moves the survivors into the monster space, they ambush the monster. So, nice to be able to skip over a space, you know, helps always to shorten the hunt. That's nice. And getting the ambush is the really big thing. This is also a lot easier to trigger. 3+ understanding, you're going to get to that usually faster than 5+ hunt XP. So this is a card that becomes very consistent later on in the campaign. I also, again, like the little bit of world building we have here, where it shows like Gorms scratching their palms using something else for the scratching. It does suggest the Gorms are not super dexterous with their palms, although if you think about it, it'd be very difficult for a Gorm to lift up one palm and then lift up the other one to scratch it, because they're not bipedal. So them reaching out to scratch a palm on something else makes a lot of sense. And I do like the little bit of world building that their palms are delicate. That's kind of cool. Okay, then on the fixed negative, we have just the one card, so I can zoom in on it. Morning Bull. You approach the fresh corpse of the Gorm. The survivors must choose to steer clear or go near. If you steer clear, you hear a mournful cry rising at your backs and suffer 3 brain event damage. If you go near, another Gorm charges out the darkness, wailing mournfully. The survivors are ambushed. Start the showdown immediately. The Gorm gains a +1 damage token. So this in some ways may feel reminiscent of some of the White Line events where you can run into an aggressive extra damage monster. Sometimes you might be willing to take the immediate showdown if you have sufficient defenses and soak to be able to deal with this +1 damage token. But earlier on, 3 brain event damage, you're going to have to take that, because +1 damage is very significant in this game. It's effectively doubling the damage of a level 1 Gorm. In the case of most attacks, that's a lot. Usually I'm going to choose to steer clear on this event, but I might go for the early start, maybe under very, very rare circumstances. The ambush isn't so much of a big deal. It's skipping your first turn. Again, if you have really good defenses via evasion, that might not matter. But I think on the whole, 9 times out of 10 or whatever, you're going to be picking to steer clear. Okay, on to the random broadly positive. We got 2. Sportsman's Kill. The survivors pass a finely armoured man commanding a retinue of slaves who are busily butchering the remains of an enormous Gorm. The man pridefully invites the survivors to marvel at his skill, and you roll on the chart. So this man is likely a great game hunter from the Great City. We've had models for those. They were planned to be involved in the Lantern Festival expansion before that was cancelled. So we've not really seen them. We don't know too much about the Great City beyond some sort of hints. It appears to have some kind of vampiric type creature at the heart of it, and it's one of those few places where there's a lot of people living in a semi-civilized fashion. We've never really explored the place though, but it's a nice piece of world building. On a 1 to 3, the man paints your face with a foul-smelling bilious fluid. The event revealer starts the showdown with the priority target token. This one, depending on who it lands on, it can be quite beneficial. But one of the neat things is you can generally play around and you have a priority target token, even if it's on the wrong person, to your own benefit. Knowing what the monster's going to pick when it's choosing a target is quite beneficial. On a 4 to 7, the man warns you of the dangers just beyond your vicinity. You may reroll 1 random hunt event during this hunt phase. That's not even the next. That's your choice when you want to spend it. That's really good. That means you can reroll 99 out of 100 hunt events if they're not the ones you want. So it's always nice to have the choice to deploy reroll. That's good. On an 8+, the man takes pity on you and whispers a secret. At the start of the showdown, the event revealer reveals the top card of the AI deck and chooses to replace it or put it on the bottom of the AI deck. Huge. Huge. So, like with any monster, when fighting the Gorm, one of the ways of mitigating the worst things it's going to do is by limiting its most advanced cards. So advanced or legendary level cards. The Gorm normally gets to go first, so here you get to curate its first action. And generally, as long as the card on top isn't terrifying, you should just leave it there. It's really beneficial to know what the Gorm is going to be doing, but of course, if you're fighting a level 3 Gorm and you see the legendary card on top, you might be just like, okay, let's send that to the bottom. We know it's the bottom card, so we know when it's coming and we can deal with it then, or remove it as a wound. So this is a great card, lots of fantastic results. Even the worst one has a little bit of humour to it. It's kind of funny at times when the wrong person gets painted as the priority target, but it's usually beneficial. I meant to do that. Right, so I didn't mean to do it, I should say. So then we have mating fields. Ahead, the ground is covered in mounds of foul-smelling corrosive vomit. Any survivors may choose to investigate. Each that does gains +1 courage and rolls on the table. So, usual general rule, if you have an investigate and you're getting plus courage or plus understanding, something like that that's a permanent progression tick, usually you do it because the price is almost worth paying. So each survivor rolls 1 at a time. On a 1 to 3, wading through the sickening pools burns your legs and produces nothing. You suffer 1 event damage to the legs location. Not ideal, but the legs are generally the best location to suffer damage overall. They have sort of less lethal results on them, which is nice. As nice as it can be. So trading 1 courage for 1 damage to the legs, 1 event damage to the legs, is a reasonable trade. On a 4 to 8, you're dizzy and filled with regret, suffer 1 brain event damage. I will take 1 brain event damage in exchange for 1 courage. Fantastic. And then on a 9+, a pool of sick contains a surprising treasure. Gain 1 random resource. This is the real big reason for doing it. 20% chance of each survivor generating a random Gorm resource is huge. Incredibly useful, always good to draw more resources. You want that. That's the heart of why you're going after these monsters. So great. You get a random hunt event if no one investigates. Unless something mechanically stops every single one of your survivors from investigating, I don't know why you would ever not investigate. So I think that's like not really a thing. And then finally, on our random bads, we have Flatter Earth. I like the joke in that one. Survivors lose their quarry's trail in a field of stone faces so badly crushed by the passing of Gorm herds that nothing remains apart from a carpet of fine pebbles. What an image, hey? What a great little piece of writing. 1 to 3, delayed. Roll 2 random hunt events before continuing on to the next hunt board space. Broadly speaking, hunt events you want as few as possible during the hunt phase because they're designed to wear you down, but they're not automatically bad. They just trend towards it. On a 4 to 8, distracted, move the Gorm 1 space away from the survivors on the hunt board. Fortunately, this doesn't tend to send the Gorm past overwhelming darkness, which is the worst possible result. So generally, it just means +1 random hunt event. That's like not ideal, but it is what it is. It's okay. And on 9+, the survivors relocate their quarry's footprint. They manage to recover 1 founding stone starting gear from the crushed up rubble. The nice thing about this is it's not one survivor being forced to take this founding stone. You can sort of choose who's going to fit it in their grid if they've got room. Generally, I do like to have an extra founding stone. Even spending it in the upcoming fight if you have location scouting can be absolutely massive, because our last hunt event is head-splitting pain. An approaching flash of light causes terrible convulsions. Move the Gorm 1 space close to the survivors on the hunt board. If it moves into their space, they're ambushed. Okay, ambush isn't ideal, but, you know, it is what it is. And then, otherwise, each survivor rolls on the table, adding their disorders. So, 1 to 3, random brain trauma. 4 to 7, random disorder. 8 to 10, shield in your eyes, you struggle to regain control, you reduce your sanity to 0. And on a 13+, a bolt of pains followed by a sudden realization, you gain the lure epilepsy fighting art. So typically, you're only going to get that 13+ with 3 disorders already clocked and rolling a 10. Let's take a quick look at lure epilepsy before moving on. Okay, so when I went to get lure epilepsy, the simulator kicked me back to the menu. Not sure exactly what happened there. Mention it just because otherwise you might be wondering why my name and pointer has changed colour. You get assigned a random colour whenever you connect, so I've reconnected. We'll see what's going on. Don't know. Anyway, so lure epilepsy reads: once per showdown, you may spend your activation to give yourself a seizure, you suffer a random brain trauma, and a knockdown. There's very few benefits to this fighting art. It's incredibly edge case if it ever is good. Except Darkness survivors can make a little bit better use of it simply because they have less of a chance of dying of brain trauma. But on the whole, like, it's a weird negative fighting art that's mostly just kind of sucks. So yeah, that's why that's down there in the negatives. Okay, right. Time is really pushing on. I've been talking about this thing for a very long time. But we got a lot left to get through, so let us move on to yep, here we are, Fetid Grotto, sorry, back one please. This is our introductory event for the level 2. So when approaching the level 2 Gorm, you have to go through this, approaches the cave, and blind exit. So approaches the cave, each survivor rolls 1d10. The Gorm's den can be tracked by smell from a great distance. Your eyes water and your stomach twists in knots as you approach. On a 1 to 3, the weak stomach prevails. You stop at the mouth of the Gorm den, doubled over in pain. You roll a dice. On a 1 to 10, you just go back to the settlement, which is a nightmare. The team has to be an entire survivor down. On a 2 to 7, you suffer the collapsed lungs, severe body injury, not great. And on an 8+, you heave and retch nothing more than bile. You suffer 1 event damage to the body location that ignores armour. That's actually quite serious, because the Gorm's retch mechanic cuts past armour and you're fighting a level 2 Gorm, meaning that it deals 2 points of damage if it ever hits you with Retch. So you've got to be hyper careful if that happens. You do not want to get Retched on, because that means 30% of the time you'll be suffering a severe body injury on the very first Retch that hits you. 33% of the time, yeah. On a 4, 5, or 6 or 7, the entrance of the Gorm Den swings open with putrid vapour. As the survivors consult amongst themselves in hushed, rasping tones, you decide to combat the miasma with a little ingenuity, putting your waist armour on your head. Add your current waist armour points to your head armour points and reduce your waist armour points to 0. Gain +2 insanity and +2 survival. Not ideal. Funny. Really funny. I'm just thinking about the concept of sticking lantern armor on your head already has me amused. It isn't ideal to have the armor points to your waist reduced to 0, but hopefully you should be able to pilot through that. On average, you've still got the same number of armor points total, and the head and waist are just as likely to be hit any time, so it's not a big difference overall. It's just a kind of thing to pay attention to and remember. And then on 8, 9 or 10, tears streaming and lungs burning, you stumble into the den. You roll another 1d10. On a 1, -1 accuracy token. On a 2 to 7, you fall to your knees, sinking into the muck. When you regain your footing, you find yourself clutching a clean bleached bone. You gain a monster bone basic resource. Always happy to draw them out the basic resource deck, because it improves the draws of everything else. Admittedly, I'd prefer to have a hide more, but a monster bone makes sense here. So extra resources, that's nice. And on an 8+, the fumes burn into your brain, suffer the frenzied brain trauma. Okay, that means you're starting at +1 speed, +1 strength, and your fighting hearts and your weapon proficiency are disabled. So just, again, bear that in mind when you're picking the hunt team to go out. There's a 1% chance they might end up, no, more 1%, 3% chance they'll end up being frenzied. On the blind exit, each victorious survivor has to roll on a 1, 2 or a 3. You stumble, lost and gagging in the caustic mist. The innervating effects of your surroundings take their toll. You suffer -1 permanent strength. You emerge dragging 1 random basic resources in your spasming fists. Not a great trade. More resources are good. Losing strength isn't. So we're kind of building a picture that we might choose to send less experienced survivors hunting the level 2 Gorm rather than our primo best hunters, because there's dice rolls that can permanently impact them. On a 4, 5 or a 6, you find the jiggling delicate mass of a newborn Gorm helplessly laying in an oozing nest of debris. If you have 3+ courage, you may slay the infant and gain 1 random Gorm resource. If you do, the ghostly cry of the dying Gorm shakes you to your core. You gain the megalophobia disorder. The megalophobia disorder essentially stops you hunting any monsters with a 3x3 or bigger base size. So Gorms, you can't go out and hunt any more Gorms while you've got it. If you do not slay the monster, you stumble away from the nest, flailing wildly in the blind mist. You gain +1 understanding and the honourable disorder. That's also not bad to get, so you've got some good options there either way, depending on how you want to angle things. I don't think there's a right answer in which way you choose to do this. You can do it role-playing wise, flavour wise, or just purely mechanically based on the needs of that particular survivor. On a 7, 8 or a 9, crawl in your hands and knees to avoid the burning mists. Pools of acid burn your limbs. Gain the Acid Palms ability and suffer -1 permanent movement. If you have the legendary Lungs secret fighting art, you spend extra time exploring and emerge with an Acid Gland Gorm resource. We'll look at the Acid Gland later. The first 2 Acid Glands I think are incredibly valuable for any settlement. That's a personal playstyle thing. You might feel differently, but we'll talk about that. Acid Palms. Acid Palms is a really good ability that gives you +1d10 strength on your unarmed attacks. So you can send your unarmed proficiency trainers or a survivor you're thinking about working on unarmed proficiency with into the Fetid Grotto for the express purpose of hoping they get this Acid Palms ability on the way out. So that's a perfectly valid strategy, is to take 4 newbies into Hunter level 2 Gorm, except that, some of them might get messed up a bit, but on the way out you might have somebody who's suddenly really good at unarmed combat. And then on a 10, grasping in the dense thick mist, you struggle to breathe. You may spend 3 survival to gain the legendary lungs secret fighting art. Yes please, legendary lungs is great. It has a whole load of applications, not just during combat but elsewhere. Super happy about that. Let's get on now to the final march. So this is hunting the level 3 Gorm. You nominate a survivor to become the ancient Gorm's bait and be removed from the hunt. During the hunt phase, when the ancient Gorm's bait would be the hunt event revealer, they are digested instead. Move the survivors along the hunt board as normal. At the start of the showdown, each non-bait survivor makes a timid entrance, and the ancient Gorm's bait is placed knocked down adjacent to the monster. This is where I speculated that the ancient Gorm, like their metabolism has slowed down and they're not producing as much bile and volume as they would do when they were in the peak of maturity, because the survivor gets to sit inside the Gorm for a reasonably long time. Okay, digested table, roll 1d10. The survivor runs wildly into the path of the lumbering ancient Gorm, wriggling its body like an ecstatic worm. The sinewy arms of the Gorm, sagging more, snatch them up. The rest of the survivors follow the bait's lantern light that shows through the ancient Gorm's distended, papery gut, thinning skin. On a 1, which is rolling here, then your armor levels at a random hit location reduced to 0 and you gain a bleeding token. That's not ideal, so you want to be hastening as much as possible. On a 2 to 3, the bubbling acids of the Gorm's gut destroy your gear. Choose one piece of gear in your gear grid and archive it. So make sure that the bait has some disposable pieces of gear that didn't cost too much to use and don't impact it too much if they are lost. On a 4, 5 or 6, heaving and choking on the sloshing fluids of the Gorm's stomach, you struggle to keep your head together and lose 2 survival and gain a random disorder. Not ideal, but it's okay. 7, 8, 9, the slow, shambling motion is sickening, the smell is gut-wrenching and the moisture makes your skin burn. You lose 1 survival and suffer 3 brain event damage. That's understandable. And on a 10, the complex biome of the Gorm's insides wondrously affects you. You may remove a permanent injury of your choice. So we have another little picture of the ancient Gorm's bait here. Perhaps they should be a survivor who's got some permanent injuries that they might want to get rid of. Okay, our timid entrance. Despite carefully picking through the mountains of sharp bones and bubbling acrid pools, you trip, causing a noisy avalanche of the debris. You suffer the broken leg, severe injury, and gain a priority target token. So because of this, we usually want to pick the order that our survivors roll on the table in to have the tank player be last in case they roll this. Broken legs suck, but they can be fixed with bed rest, the bed innovation. So, yeah. 2 or 3, the morphal howl of the approaching Gorm weakens your resolve, set your insanity to 0 and gain the megalophobia disorder. We already briefly covered that. It's not too bad. By this stage you should have the barber surgeon to remove it if you need to, but also, you may not have that many large base monsters to be concerned about. It depends on the campaign. 4, 5 or 6, shuffling past the debris strewn mounds, shreds your leg armour. Suffer 3 event damage to your leg's location. Your hapless struggle dislodges something useful, gain 1 random basic resource. Not an ideal result, but you're getting some compensation. Bear this in mind when hunting the level 3 Gorm. It can shred you quite badly before you even get to the showdown, much like the level 2 Gorm. On a 7, 8 or 9, centuries worth of bleached bones stretch as far as the eye can see. Eerie shadows player cross over the Gorm yard from the swaying light of the approaching monster's lure, and you gain the lure epilepsy fighting art. Yeah. And then on a 10, poking through the rubble, you spot a gleaming black mass bobbing in the tarry depths of a nearby pool. Carefully you fish out the stone, which is surprisingly heavy. You gain 1 Gormite strange resource. Gormite's really good. This is a great result. Additionally, if you have no survival when you approach the pool, your exhaustion makes you stumble. As you emerge, the tar seems permanently stuck to your body, granting newfound stability. You gain 1 Gormite strange resource, same as the normal 10 result, and the immovable object secret fighting art. I'll read that out right now and just briefly discuss it. You don't really want to engineer the situation where you have 0 survival. That's not how you want to be approaching the start of a showdown, but hey, if it does happen, at least you get some compensation. Okay, a movable object. the secret fighting art reads, if you're on an unoccupied space, you stand firm in the face of any force, you cannot be knocked down, and you may ignore knockback. If you occupy the same space as a monster, impassable terrain talent, or a survivor, you're knocked down and suffer knockback as normal, because you can't have the two things occupying the same space. This is quite nice. It's not the strongest secret fighting art in the world. It does have some benefits, and it has a really sweet piece of art, and it's a nice reference to the Blob from Marvel, from X-Men, who is the immovable object, Juggernaut being the irresistible force. Okay, that's all of our entry in on there, so now we finally get to go and take a look at the Showdown page itself. Okay, so hunt phase, very briefly on the layout, we can see 1, 2 here, and then the other event here. There's no space before the level 2 Gorm, so bear in mind that for if you're looking to put like special hunt events in, you're not going to get the spot here. And then we got 1, 2 here, so this is another 5 event monster, which is a little bit less common than 4s. Otherwise this is very reminiscent of the White Lions hunt track. When we look at we'll take a look at this when we get down to the dashboard, but we're mostly looking at the Showdown setup here. The key thing is, in addition to 2 random terrain cards, we're also getting the tall grass terrain. They're in fixed spots on these 2 corners of the Gorm, meaning it's not quite as strong as fighting the White Lion, but this is still a benefit you've got access to in every single Showdown fight against the Gorm, so that's something you can take advantage of. As we'll see when we start looking at the Gorm, it's actually a bit harder to take advantage of tall grass than it is when fighting the White Lion, because the Gorm forces you to play in a different manner. Okay, our victory is pretty standard. Plus 100 XP for level 1, weapon proficiency and rewards. Plus 2 for the level 2 or 3. Plus 1 weapon proficiency level and rewards. If defeated, all consumable gear is gone. Bear that in mind. You don't want to lose the Showdown fights anyway, but this thing will eat your monster grease, for example, and your bird bread and all those kind of things, so if you're not feeling confident about fighting a level 2 or a level 3, maybe you need to gear up a bit more, because this is, or not take this kind of stuff along, which is rough. It's a rough price to pay, but if you can afford to lose a piece of monster grease, maybe you think about it. It's, in short, it's not as easily gamed as the White Lion one, which just removes a piece of jewellery, just 1 piece of jewellery, so you can chuck some stone noses in. This is way more significant. On the rewards, we get the Gormery and the Gorm Commist settlement locations, and if you've not innovated it yet, you get Negredo. Also, resources, 4 basic, 4 Gorm for level 1, plus 2 Gorm for level 2, so to a total of 6. And then against level 3, it's 4 basic, 8 Gorm, a stomach lining, and a black lichen. So we'll take a look at the stomach lining when we get to the resource section. And finally, if you've innovated Song of the Brave when you defeat a Gorm, or the Gorm, you compose a formidable song filled with wild cries to ward off the mating Gorm herds from the settlement's vicinity, and you get to remove Gorm Climate. So now we see how we get rid of Gorm Climate. It's Song of the Brave. Song of the Brave is a music innovation. It's in the music tree, so you definitely want to be getting music anyway. A Song of the Brave is fantastic, so this is a priority for you. If you're struggling with Gorm Climate and you want to get rid of it, you just get Song of the Brave and you defeat any Gorm, and job done. Okay, now it is time for us to go to the Gorm dashboard, and we'll start moving through all of the cards. Okay, so on the stat front, we have a lot of similarities again to the White Lion. We can see that at level 1, it has 8 basic, 2 advanced for a total of 11 wounds to kill it, 6 movement, and 8 toughness. Very similar. At the level 2, we go up to a total of 14 cards for 15 wounds, increasing basics by 1. Our advanced go up by 3. The Gorm now has 9 movement, which is a fair jump, 11 toughness, so plus 3 toughness, plus 1 speed, plus 1 damage, that's standard. And as we mentioned before, we have Fetid Grotto. It also gains the Gorm Den and Must traits, so we'll take a look at those. Finally, against the level 3 Gorm, it has 10 basics, 8 advanced, and 2 legendary for a total of 21 wounds, 8 movement. You see it's slowed down a bit from the mature. It's demonstrating its age. It's a nice little bit of show don't tell. 15 toughness, a fair number to beat. Plus 2 speed, plus 2 damage. You have the final march, which we already looked at, and it has ancient tusks and Gorm Yard, and plus 1 luck, making it hard to critically wound. What's interesting here is we can see that instead of just building upon the traits and getting more and more, there's a whole contextual change of the traits, and that's a really nice thing that makes the Gorm feel a bit different when fighting at level 2 and level 3. The Gorm's instinct is Illuminate. The bulb increases in density, suddenly making the darkness light. Until the end of the round, all of the survivors are now threats, even if they're knocked down or use an effect that says otherwise. That's similar to the White Lion. In addition, insane survivors are thrown into wild fits and they are knocked down. So a mild instinct. I don't think it's too bad. Basic action, very similar to the White Lions. Closest threat facing in range, or closest survivor in field of view, and no target illuminate, flow step, and then it's a 2 speed, 2 plus accuracy, 1 damage attack. Fairly basic standard starting baseline. There are some extra wrinkles to how this targeting goes, as we're going to see when we start discussing fighting the Gorm itself. There is actually differences. Even though this targeting seems quite similar to the White Lions, it actually plays out quite differently. Okay, first up then on the traits we have Gorm Den. Very simple. Survivors cannot surge unless they spend an additional survival, because it's full of awful fumes. There's not really much more to say than that. It's doubling the cost of your surges. That does slow down the showdown. You've only got half the number of surges as required, and the Gorm at 9 movement is quite hard to dash cancel, so it's reducing the effect of your survival actions on 2 fronts. Must over here. All survivors with 3 or less hunt XP gain -2 accuracy and +2 strength tokens, so this puts that wrinkle into sending newbies out. You've got to use quite accurate weapons, but they are going to secure better results. They're going to wound more easily. It is tough, and usually you will aim for 3 hunt XP survivors here, because you can't surge a lot due to Gorm's Den, and these two sort of interplay back and forth on that particular front. It's a little awkward to deal with. So I like to take 4 hunt XP survivors out to hunt the level 2 Gorm if I can, but I'm okay with lower than that because the trade-off's fine as long as I have good, fairly accurate weapons. Here's the big thing. So at the end of each monster turn, perform Retch. We're going to look at Retch in specific detail on the Showdown board, but the big thing to understand about it is Retch is a very scary and very dangerous reaction. The Gorm does it when you hit it. With Must going on, it's doing it at the end of every single monster turn, which is frankly really, really scary, because Wretches move the Gorm 2 spaces backwards. Survivors in the vomit zone suffer monster level damage to a random hit location that ignores armor. So if we look at the cone, the zone I should say, it's not a cone, it's a zone. This is 4 spaces forward and 1 space to either side of the Gorm. So we can see, just looking at this, survivors could have been in any of these spaces which were originally adjacent to the Gorm, and probably this survivor here may have been targeted, and so the Gorm's going to bounce backwards and vomit all over them. A head hit is going straight to a severe injury, and as we've noted, there's chances you may have already suffered injuries to the body already. So that is something to be quite concerned about. This is a fairly dangerous thing to have triggering at the end of the monster's turn. Dealing with it as a reaction is a lot easier, and we'll look at that when we go to the hit location deck. But yeah, this is a fairly frightening trait in many ways. Then we have Ancient Tusks. This replaces the Gorm's basic action. It performs basic action at the start of each monster's turn. Closest threat facing in range, or closest threat in field of view, or illuminate. I'm not going to mention the no target for any more of the AI cards for the rest of this video. Just it's there. Flow step. Again, we'll stop talking about the flow steps unless they're extra flow steps after the attack. So 3 speed, 2+ accuracy, 4 damage, and remember that the Ancient Gorm has extra tokens as well. +2 speed, +2 damage. Then after damage, knockback 10, bash, bleed 1. A pretty frightening attack overall, quite high damage, 6 damage, quite high speed at 5. You should be able to handle this kind of stuff though. If you're hunting level 3s, you should have the loadout and gear for it already. The other trait is Gormyard. This is the flip side of the Gorm Den. Survivors cannot dash unless they spend an additional 1 survival. I think this one isn't as bad as Gorm Den, and honestly I prefer fighting the level 3 Gorm over the level 2 Gorm quite often, because honestly this must is a rough time, and I would take Ancient Dusk over Must if I'm prepared for it. Likewise, I think this is better to deal with than this. So in some ways, you'll find people saying, I prefer fighting the level 3 Gorm over the level 2, and this is a big part of the reason why, because they're so contextually different creatures. Okay, we're on to the AI cards. So these are organised, running in columns is like roughly matching types, and rows is increasing level of threat as we move down, become more and more dangerous. We have on the left here though to start with Hiccup. So I've pulled this one out for a specific reason. So Hiccup is what I reference as a trough. A trough is a moment where the monster is almost as unthreatening as possible. It's an opportunity for survivors. Now I expect and hope that Hiccup is errated to not target a survivor when we get to Campaigns of Death, because as it stands right now, you can actually generate unlimited amounts of insanity with Hiccup via the monster targeting rules, because of how the monster controller tile works. Essentially, you have the monster controller be the first survivor in range, they gain +1 insanity for being targeted, and then you walk through the Hiccup. Assuming you're not doing that, then Hiccup's a kind of cute and fun little thing which has the monster hiccuping, bouncing backwards and throwing up and doing it over and over again until you hit the monster, aka pat the baby, in order to get it to stop hiccuping. Yeah, you know, soothe the baby. It's cute, it's a nice piece of reference. The trouble is that this goes back on top of the deck and keeps repeating, and if you're going to be abusive and take advantage of the game's rules as thoroughly as possible, then as I say, you have the monster controller be first survivor in range and rotate that every single turn. You don't have to worry about survivors getting knocked down for being adjacent or wretch hitting, because eventually the Gorm hiccups itself to the edge of the board and then just moves around the board backwards over and over and over again, eternally, until somebody hits it. As I say, this gets solved by not letting the target part be relevant. It's not really needed for how this card works anyway. You could get rid of that and just have the text start with the roll and produce down to here. But ultimately, this is a co-op game. You can decide if you want to give a survivor 10,000, 100,000 insanity, whatever you fancy. If they're immortal, that might kind of break the game quite badly. But it is an option, it is there available, and I do hope it gets changed in the future. Right, so let's go on to the next column, which are all of the attacks. So we first of all have our standard attacks. These are the ones that I rate as not being too bad, either because they can be disabled through severe injuries, or they're just kind of baseline attacks for the monster. We have more arm toss, random threat in range. So we're already seeing like random threat, that's something. Random survivor in range. Full move towards the target, starting with the target, make a separate attack against each survivor adjacent to the Gorm. 2 speed, 2+ accuracy, 1 damage, and after damage, knockback 5. This also has jaw paralysis. The Gorms limp more hands, caress nearby faces, and survivors directly in front of the monster gain +3 insanity instead of all of the rest. AoE attack. This predates the idea of synchronic attacks. Maybe it'll get updated to be a synchronic attack. Who knows? Anyway, this is like not too bad at all. It is rare that the Gorm hits a huge amount of targets like this. You can usually avoid that because you generally don't want lots of survivors being grouped up together. Sometimes it'll hit maybe 2 survivors. If you're really unfortunate, it might hit 3. Luckily, the attack isn't that strong. Then we have Wallop, closest threat in field of view and range, random survivor in range, random again, interesting. It's a 2+, 2 speed, 2+ accuracy, 1 damage attack. This is kind of one of its base attacks, so to speak. It's like the basic action with targeting differences. Not much more to say about it. It's like Claw in some ways, just a little bit less predictable. Aggravated Bite. Closest threat facing in range, closest threat in field of view, no target illuminates, 2 speed, 2+ accuracy, 1 damage, and bleed 1. Another fairly standard attack, just slightly better than Wallop, like slightly more dangerous, but a bit more predictable, given that it likes to pick closest threat. You'll often find that, well, the nice thing with this is the very first one doesn't care about facing, unlike this, so usually you'll have some control over who the Wallop happens on. Aggravated Bite, you should have like almost complete control over who's going to be targeted. You just need to have that target be the closest threat. Everyone should be around equidistance, or your tank should be a little bit closer. Head Thrash, random knockdown survivor in range, so that's an unusual circumstance. We can avoid that if a survivor we do not want to get head thrashed is knocked down. Get them on their feet before drawing the AI card. Or a random survivor in range, so usually this is going to be a random survivor in range. 2+ speed, 2 speed, 2+ accuracy, 2 damage. So this is one of the more scary damage totals, but I think as advanced cards go, this is the weakest one of the lot. Target suffers bash, full move the monster away from the closest threat, so it bashes and then runs away. The severe injury is jaw paralysis, which is, you see the same one as more arm toss. So same text, +3 insanity for survivors directly in front of the monster. Not too bad, again, to deal with. I think this is an okay card. Obviously 2 damage can be quite frightening at lower levels, but once you're fighting the level 2 Gorm, you should be able to handle this kind of damage number. Then we have Backslap. Backslap's one of my favourites. It's really fun. Closest threat facing range, closest threat field of view. So it moves and attacks the target, and you then turn the Gorm so the target is in the monster's blind spot, and then you do a 1 speed, 2+ accuracy, 1 damage attack with knockback 5 after damage, and then the Gorm turns to face the target. It does a big old giant backhand spin. It's fun. You really don't have to go through all the steps of moving the Gorm through this, but you absolutely should, because what are you, some kind of inhuman monster? No, take some joy from the Gorm expressing and moving in this really fun way of big giant slap. Last of all, we have Body Check, random survivor in range. Again, random survivor. It's a move and attack, 1 speed, 2+ accuracy, 1 damage, and after damage bash and knockback 7. So we're already seeing the Gorm does a lot of body checking and slamming targets back. And also, it is less predictable in its targeting than the White Lion. We do have a fair amount that chooses closest threat and goes for facing, but that isn't as guaranteed as it is with the White Lion. This makes the monster less predictable and harder to deal with. Now, I'm going to take a short break and have a drink, and when I come back we're going to go through the next set of cards. Okay, so on our medium difficulty, medium threat level cards, we've got 4. We'll start with Headbutt. So this is random threat in field of view and range, so quite hard to control. As long as you're within range, you're potentially the target. 1 speed, 2+ accuracy, 1 damage, and after damage, Retch. So that's the really bad part of this more than anything else. That Retch, that is a lot of damage that is cutting past your armour. Now against the level 1, not too bad. Getting hit in the head will knock you down. If you've already taken that head hit, then this is extra scary. But generally you can withstand a couple of Retches before you start taking severe injuries against level 1. Obviously the threat level of this climbs up when you're dealing with level 2 and level 3, and you probably want to be removing this as a wound if you can manage that. Rampaging. So, Rampaging, closest threat facing range, so predictable who it's going to hit. But if there's nobody in the front facing, okay, nobody there, it's just going to go straight to the instinct. It's a 2 speed, 2+ accuracy, 2 damage, and after damage, bash. And then it full moves towards the closest threat in range, so that's the other scary part of this, and it performs, puts Rampaging back on top of the deck and then performs a basic action. So it's going to double attack with this. Luckily it then goes back on top of the deck, so you can remove it with a wound once it stops rampaging. That's the only reason this isn't down in the category below, because generally you should only have to deal with this once per showdown. Next up we have Scratch. Closest threat facing range, closest threat in field of view, the very standard form of targeting. 1 speed, 2+ accuracy, 1 damage, but before damage you have to reduce the armor points at all rolled hit locations to 0, which is pretty bad, and the kind of thing that needs to be dealt with via, ignoring hits and reducing hits, etc, etc. It's not too terrifying when you're hunting the level 1. Again, this scales up quite scarily once you get further up. And the last one of these 4 is Eat and Run. Random threat facing in range, closest threat in field of view, so you're going to find often that's actually closest threat in field of view. 2 speed, 2+ accuracy, 2 damage. If the attack dealt damage more than once, full move the Gorm toward in a straight line and perform Grab. We know how our friend Grab works. That's then gonna... There's no runaway on this particular thing. Sorry, there is a runaway. I mean, there's no additional runaway. They just get grabbed. So this is like fighting the White Lion. This is where the Gorm will isolate one of your survivors and dump them knocked down in a place, hopefully for the Gorm, away from everyone else. That's why this is in the medium tier, along with that extra damage. That's quite a lot of damage. Luckily, if it doesn't manage to hit you more than once, it doesn't get to do the grab, so that's why this is in the middle category. If it just gets you once with 1 lot of damage, you're not going to get dragged off. So block, dodge, all of those things, very helpful. Last of all, on the attacks, we have these. These are the ones I consider to be most terrifying. We got 3 of them. We start with Charge. Closest threat facing range, random survivor in field of view. This is 4 speed, 2+ accuracy, 2 damage, and after damage, bash and knockback 5. That's a lot of dice, and 2 damage, that's double base damage. Pretty scary. And then it full moves towards closest threat. That's actually not too much of a deal, because you won't be the threat if you get bashed and knocked back 5, so it's going to move towards somebody else. Additionally, if gimped, you get knocked down. So the big thing that makes this scary is the number of dice that are involved in this attack. It's a lot. And the damage being scaled up as well makes this quite scary. Then we have Flatten. This is a random survivor in the blind spot. Otherwise, it's the closest survivor in field of view in range. Move and attack the target. You turn the Gorm so the target is in the monster's blind spot. It is 5 dice with 2+ accuracy, 2 damage. After damage, you suffer bash and knockback 5, and then the Gorm gets knocked down. So, Gorm knockdown is at least a little sweetener at the end of this entire thing, because otherwise this is absolutely nightmarish. But of particular note is a little story that I have with regards to this. When I was introducing this game to my gaming group back in the UK, in Cardiff, we decided, well, I was letting them decide what they wanted to do, and they chose to hunt a Gorm as the first thing they hunted. You know, I put down the white line, I put down the Gorm, I gave them the choice, they chose the Gorm. On the very first turn of that entire showdown, the Gorm drew Flatten, and I was picked as the target because I'd started as monster controller and died. My survivor died immediately, and I sat out the rest of that showdown, and it very much set the entire tone for the whole thing. So Flatten is nightmarishly scary on a level 1. Absolutely terrifying. It's still just brutal almost everywhere. This high speed is scary as heck. So this is the kind of thing I want to remove as a wound. Last of all, on this slot we have Ancient Bite. This is just with the level 3 Gorm. Closest threat facing in range, closest threat in field of view. 3 speed, 2+ accuracy, 7 damage, and remember the damage tokens are on top of that. And after it, bash and bleed 3. It also has an extra little trigger, which if the target dies from the attack, Melting Horror. We'll look at that in a moment. Bleed 3 though, that is really significant. That's a lot of bleed. We've seen already on the Ancient Horns, you know, that alternate thing, that's doing a lot of bleed as well. So you absolutely have to keep on top of bleed. You really can't afford even to have 1 bleed, because if 1 bleed becomes 2 bleed, then suddenly Ancient Bite can just kill someone out of nowhere. Okay, let's look at Melting Horror. Okay, so if the survivor dies to the Ancient Bite, then Melting Horror triggers. Shocked to be standing, the bitten survivor clutches their wounds in disbelief. Before the other's eyes, the survivor's look of relief disintegrates as the toxic microbes of the Gorm's Ancient Bite hungrily liquefy their flesh. All other survivors on the showdown board witness the atrocity. On a 1 to 2, each survivor's rolling on a 1 to 2. They're knocked down and gain absent seizures. On a 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, light-headed, a gentle spinning sensation brings you to the ground. Heaving and drooling, you take this opportunity to steal your nerves, gain +3 survival and the lure epilepsy fighting art. If you have pottery innovated, then the victorious survivors scrape the still bubbling remains and gain 1 life elixir gear in the aftermath. I've talked about life elixir gear in the Gormery and You video. Yeah, that's on my channel. There's a playlist for all of the and You videos, you can check it there. On 8, 9 or 10, Rooted. At the very moment of realisation, you see that this is the very essence of your existence. Helplessness and terror give way to a cold, solid feeling in the pit of your stomach. As you watch your friend disintegrate, the sensation runs down to your legs, rooting you in place, dissipating your desperate desire to flee. You gain -1 permanent movement. 5 to 4 is okay. Like, 4 movements livable in this game. 3 is where things start to get really problematic. And the immovable object fighting art, which we talked about earlier. So this event isn't bad. The bad things already happened. The survivors died. There's opportunities to get good stuff here, although absent seizures, not ideal. Lure epilepsy, not a very useful fighting art at all. But on the other hand, movable objects okay. Life elixirs fairly decent at times. So yeah, that's Melting Horror. On to the Intimidates. So I don't consider any of the Gorm Intimidates to be in the like soft category. They're all kind of dangerous. We have here in the medium category just the one card, Strobe. Turn to face most survivors, then target all survivors in the monsters facing. You're going to find with the way you fight the Gorm, this is usually going to be 2 survivors. It's unlikely to just be 1. You roll 1d10 for each target, and 3+ they suffer monster level brain damage, they get knocked down, and then the Gorm faces the opposite board edge, which means the knockdown survivors, or likely knockdown survivors, have reached to the blind spot, but it's protected its blind spot from everyone else. Then the rest of these I consider to be pretty bad. There's just 2 of them. The first one's Infrasonic Roar. Hits all threats, so that's all survivors on their feet. You know, if you're knocked down for some reason, then yay, you don't have to listen to this. Intimidate all targets. Roll 1d10 for each target. On a 3+, the target suffers monster level brain damage and monster level damage to the head location. And then, after another flow step, the Gorm full moves towards the furthest threat. So these survivors have not even been knocked down unless they've suffered a severe injury to the head location as a result of this. So not only does this deal brain damage, but this also deals head damage, which is scary, and it then moves towards isolating a single survivor and trying to engineer a 1v1 situation, which is usually bad for the survivor. The other one is Ancient Light. So this is only the level 3 Gorm. Turn to face the most survivors. Target all monsters in the monsters facing. Again, this is probably going to be at least 2 survivors. Roll 1d10 for each target, and roll a 3+. They suffer a random brain trauma, so they could just die. And they gain the absent seizures disorder, which, as we discussed before, not particularly nice. And then it again turns to face the opposite board edge, same as the previous card. So these 2, I would honestly take Ancient Light most of the time over Infrasonic Roar, but rolling on that brain trauma table can be particularly scary if you've not taken Accept Darkness as your, is it Society Principle? Yeah, Society Principle. Now we have the moods. We've got 3. I consider all these to be fairly soft. I don't mind the Gorm's moods. Part of the effect of moods is that the monster is effectively wounding itself, reducing the number of hits you need to kill it. Posture in bits is the first one. When this comes into play, you draw an AI so it replaces itself. The Gorm asserts its dominance over the challenged survivor. Whenever a survivor ends their act in the Gorm's blind spot, if they don't have any armor points in their location, reduce them to 0, otherwise they suffer monster level damage to that location. And additionally, if you defeat the Gorm while this is in play, if you don't have ammonia already, you get ammonia. Nice. The main thing this does is essentially it tells you you're not allowed to go into the monster's blind spot and attack it and end your act there. If you move in, attack the monster in the blind spot and dash away, that's okay. If you start your turn in the monster's blind spot and you attack it and then move away, that's also fine. Or if you don't go anywhere near the blind spot, you're also fine. This is a really soft card. It's got a big old punishment sitting on it, but you should not ever really be triggering that. If you are taking this damage, you've chosen to take this damage. So that's a very soft mood. Thunderfoot, again, replaces itself with an AI card. Any survivor that ends their act in the Stomping Zone, which is a fairly big space. We're looking at 3 out in all directions, including diagonals. It's a huge zone. When they end their act, they suffer knockback 5 and get knocked down. When the monster is wounded, discard this card. So you can move in and hopefully wound the monster to discard this card, or you could shoot it with a ranged weapon, or throw a founding stone if you have some spare founding stones, all that kind of stuff. It's fairly easy to deal with. Additionally, knockback 5 and being knocked down on the survivor's turn generally just means you spend the monster's turn knocked down, and the Gorm isn't a massive punisher of knockdown survivors. In fact, sometimes it's generous towards knockdown survivors. So this is quite different to how it would be facing the White Lion, where you might be concerned because being knocked down could result in a massive punishment. The legendary one, So remember, this is our third legendary card. It's Ancient Digestion. Survivors who are damaged by Wretch gain 1 bleeding token and lose 1 survival. If the Gorm is defeated when this card is in play, the settlement gains +2 Gorm resources during the aftermath. So the nice part of this is extra resources, but you really need to pay attention to bleed. You've got a clear bleed whenever you take it if Ancient Indigestion is drawn. I would rather have Ancient Indigestion over the Ancient Bite for sure, if I have a choice about which one's coming up, as this is also a self wound and extra resources. That's all amazing. It is just something to be aware of. Do pack a good amount of anti-bleed when fighting the Ancient Gorm. Okay, and then we have our 1 duration rear up. So durations, they are, when they're drawn, they do one thing because they're drawn face down, and then when they are drawn face up, they do a different thing. So when this card is drawn face down, the Gorm laboriously lifts its front legs and ends its turn. Anyone adjacent gets knocked down. That's annoying because you need to be encouraged back up, otherwise you miss your turn. And you do need to be encouraged back up if this happens. While the card is in play, the Gorm has +5 toughness tokens, more or less making most survivors pass on trying to attack the monster at this point. It's generally not worth it unless you're using a ranged weapon. But if you do manage to wound, you get rid of the rear up. When this card is drawn face up, the Gorm crashes down. All adjacent survivors suffer a random severe injury and gain the megalophobia disorder. I'm still yet to have this happen to a survivor. Usually when rear up occurs, I can either remove it as a wound or I can get everyone clear in time. I haven't had this random severe injury clock in yet. I can't remember the last time it ever happened to a survivor I was controlling, so I think this is very soft, essentially because you can just get the heck away from it, or if you weren't adjacent in the first place, the monster's kind of just doing a little pretty dance for you for no real benefit to it. So that's the AI cards. You see, as per a Node 1 monster, most of them are in the top row, or at least down in the middle. There's not many I think are super dangerous, and most of those a significant portion of those are actually legendary, and even one of the legendary cards I think is quite soft. So it's reasonable to fight. On targeting, I think you may have noticed I haven't been able to identify like a core targeting pattern. The Gorm is a bit unpredictable. There's general rules you can kind of follow, but the key thing is if you're in range of the Gorm, you potentially could get attacked by it, so you want to bear that in mind. Now let's go on to the hit locations. I've again categorized these in a few different sections. It's different. This isn't to do with threat level. Instead here we have got cards that have like no reaction type, failure reaction and wound reaction. There's no reflex reaction in the Gorm selection, and then we've got the trap right at the end. This should be faster to go through because there is a lot of duplicates. For example, when we look at these, the first 4 of them, the top half is all identical, and this is giving us a big piece of information about how we fight the Gorm. So when you attack from the Gorm's flank, you gain +2 strength when attempting to wound, and the flank is any space adjacent to the monster that is not in the monster's facing or blind spot. So this is a new quote-unquote blind spot mechanic. It's not really. It's encouraging you to fight the monster on the sides, adjacent to it, like a mammoth hunt, which is very much the way you should think of this, like the old images of painted artists' depictions of mammoth hunts, which has humans on either side of the monster attacking it with spears, on either side of the mammoth attacking it with spears. That's kind of how you would be doing this, harrying the Gorm on the flanks. With regards to critical wounds, random Gorm resources +1 courage. Gimped, we saw where Gimped impacted. This one you gain Mammoth Hunting, fighting art, but the Gorm is enraged and gains +1 damage. Mammoth Hunting is quite a nice little fighting art. It reads, gain +1 strength when attacking from adjacent spaces outside of the monster's facing and blind spot. So it's half of the flank mechanic given to you, but it also stack on top of the of flank. And it's also directly referencing that entire fighting style, that way of hunting mammoths that we've seen. We have this critical wound. Turn the Gorm to face the opposite board edge and full move in a straight line. At the end of its movement, the monster is knocked down. So, just fairly soft. And we have the death blow. So you'll notice one important thing: the death blow does not have a critical wound location on it. So if you manage to wound on the death blow, then you will nominate a survivor to retrieve the lure, the bulb, and you gain the pure bulb, Gorm resource, but that survivor suffers blind plus +1 permanent speed. The pure bulb is worth this price, but you don't have a choice in it anyway, but you absolutely do want to get this death blow. Just think carefully about who you want +1 speed on. You can pick any of the victorious survivors for this. Whoop, excuse me. Then we have down here the Mammoth Floated Face, just the one card, random Gorm resource on a crit, and the Mammoth Ridge Spine is a super dense location, so be aware the Gorm has a super dense location. This is something the White Line does not, and it's a knockdown on the crit. In our failures, we've got 2 up here that have the Gorm turned to face the opposite board edge and full move in a straight line. So that the Gorm just turns around and will run over anyone in the blind spot. It's okay to be knocked down during the survivor's phase generally. That's because you'll get up after the monster's phase, so you don't have to be encouraged to avoid missing a turn. Crits, -1 accuracy, and specifically gain the jiggling lard, which you could eat it if you wanted to. Generally you don't want to eat it, but as the campaign progresses you might do, if you want that +1 courage, especially triggering the bold threshold on during the showdown is quite a good trigger to have the courage milestone. On our failures here, these 3 are identical. It's a basic action targeting the attacker, that's very standard and normal. Crits include -1 movement, +1 courage and +1 survival on a 5+, for ruining the mandible, but that's not a permanent injury. And all survivors gain, the attacker gains +1 survival. And then we have our first wretches. These are failure wretches. I've discussed how wretch works. We're going to take a specific look at positioning against wretch right at the end of this video. Critical wounds, stout kidney, that's an okay resource. +3 insanity for survivors in the vomit zone. So this is worth noting, these crits mean wretch doesn't happen, which is very beneficial. So critical wounds are quite good. Luck-based attacking styles against the Gorm are quite good. Okay, and then on our wound results, we have 1 mammoth skull. It's the same as the bulging eye. These ones here. Turn to face the opposite board edge and full move in a straight line. So again, having the Gorm run over the blind spot. On the crit, you gain the active thyroid. The active thyroid is a strange resource, and this is the only place where you're going to get the active thyroid. If you want it, and you do want it, you're going to need to aim towards dealing a good amount of critical wounds, have a good odds of doing it. So Lucky Charm, deadly weapons, that kind of stuff. It's always good, or almost always good, but it's extra good against the Gorm. And we have on our wound results, we've got 4, so the Gorm is more likely to retch on a wound, something we need to pay attention to. We have persistent injuries here with jaw paralysis, we saw that before, lame. At the start of each monster turn, the Gorm's knocked down on a 9 or a 10, and then a random Gorm resource, and then if you're in the vomit zone and you crit here, which is to be honest, less likely, really, you shouldn't be in the vomit zone when attacking, but if it happens somehow, then you actually get to heal all injury levels at any one hit location of your choice. I very rarely have ever benefited from healthy vomit, because usually things have gone horribly wrong if you're in position for this to even affect you. Finally, we have the trap. This trap's a weird one. It doesn't doom anyone at all when it happens. And that's got implications because the attacker's ended and there's survival opportunities at the end of an attack, and I still really am not clear about the actual rules answers in how this should be navigated. I generally just don't take advantage of it because I don't want to deal with that. And it's a co-op game, so you know, I can think how I like and play how I like during all of that. Full move the Gorm towards the attacker. If the monster ends movement adjacent to the attacker, it headbutts him with its enormous skull as its lure dances frantically atop its head, and you suffer monster level damage to the head location. Head damage is always quite frightening because it's the most vulnerable location, it's the most potentially lethal location. Only the body comes close because the body gets hit more often. Then you turn the monster face to most survivors, and each survivor in the monster's facing is knocked down and suffers monster level brain damage. So this can sometimes knock 3 survivors down if the survivor who hit the trap is in a bad position. And then we get our usual resolve and reshuffle. Overall, and we'll go to the showdown board now to talk about it more, the key things to consider is that the Gorm is not super predictable, and in particular Wretch is quite an issue. So we've got, if I just top view this here, a wide variety of survivors, and they're in a bunch of different positions. So I wanted to highlight how you want to be thinking when fighting this. So Wretch, as we saw, is on a number of cards, and when you're attacking, it's got a reasonable chance of being triggered on wounds and a lesser chance on failures, but it is still something to think about. Now, what Wretch means is that the Gorm is going to move back 2 spaces. Let's just move Zachary out of the way for the moment. 2 spaces. Okay. Whoops. And then it's going to retch and vomit. This is the vomit zone here. So what we can see immediately is we've got a couple of positions that you should not be in at the start of an attack. So this is what you want to be paying attention to. So let's go through them. Front facing, Alistair here, I mean, he looks very brave staring into the face of the Volvermore. But I mean, he's just going to get vomited on and suffer that damage if somebody triggers a Wretch. So he should be moving out of the way before any of that happens, before an attack happens. He shouldn't attack from the front facing, he should be getting out of the way. The other one over here is Urza, who, as we noticed, the Gorm moves back to here and she gets hit as well. So what we've established now is these 2 spots here, these 2, they're pretty bad to be attacking from or be in when someone's attacking as well, because you're in the vomit zone. So if we move Urza out of the way now and put Urza in a sensible place, then we've now got people who are in a variety of good positions. But to visualize the vomit zone, you want to be thinking of it, it's this, like here. Any of these spaces here, because the Gorms are occupying those spaces, you're not going to be in them, so it's any of these spaces here. They're places where you could get vomited on. Now, with all our remainders, these are survivors who are in a variety of different, fairly safe positions. The surprising one some people might wonder about is Zachary. So, as long as Zachary attacks first, he's in a fine position. If the Gorm retches, it bounces back on top of him, and he'll get knocked back and knocked down, sure, but the Gorm doesn't punish collisions. So he'll actually be knocked down for the Gorm's turn and then get up in time for his next turn. So if the Gorm retches, he'd end up like back here and be knocked down. And that's okay. It's okay to get knocked down during the survivor's turn, as long as you've already spent your act for that turn. You won't have to miss a go. Of the others, Lucy here is in one of the prime positions. This isn't going to get retched on, so Lucy could attack here, not worry about getting retched, and then if the Gorm does move backwards, she could then spend her movement to get out of the vomit zone that would occur from any future attacks. Hi Pam. No, you can't have anything to eat, okay? You have to wait. My dog is pacing around and pestering me because I have been at this for too long. We're still not done. Then we've got the Necromancer, and over here this leather armoured survivor. These both have reach weapons, thus the King Spear and the counterweighted axe, so they can attack with a gap just far enough away. So on this isn't a flank, but now we're far enough back that we don't need to worry about Invomitodon. Same here, because if you look, the Gorm moves back here, and we're fine. We need to move before any further attacks happens, but that's an okay spot to be in. And with reach, it fits. Same over here with this spear at that distance. And then finally we have Hungry Basalt here, who's demonstrating one of the starting positions for a tank. This is in the tall grass, which is nice. It's not in the vomit zone because the vomit zone ends here. So we see we're 1, 2, 3 away. 1, 2, 3. And we're perfectly safe. And so if the Gorm doesn't move, we would be a great target. If the Gorm does move, it's often going to attack the front facing, so you just need to make sure nobody else is closer if that happens. Now the last thing to consider is, because of the safe spots, let's just put you here and let's move the others away. Because of the general safe spots for a particular hunt party, you will find at times that your hunt team sort of gets split up a bit like this. Get away, you. And you can see they're all one on each facing. That can be bad because the monster has by default forced you to split the party, meaning that if it does like knock back someone, like this chap gets knocked back to here, and then follows after them, then suddenly it's isolated one survivor very quickly. One of the key things you can do to avoid that, first of all, is being okay with attacking in the blind spot, and then you sort of move over to like a safe side spot, like say here, or employing stuff like spears. So like this guy could be here, and then they're both able to attack. She could go first, and then if the Gorm retches, then she can move out the way, and then he can go without having to move, and they're both on the same flank. Same with bows and things like that. So you could, nicely have a party that just sits all on one side of the board to avoid being split. Okay, so that's the general rule of fighting the Gorm. Be on the flanks, except that it's going to be a bit harder to determine who is attacking. And as always with any monster, once you get to the end of the first lap of the AI deck and everything's in the discard pile, it's public information, it's derived information. Have a look. Go through it and pay attention and see what your Gorm's targeting is like. Grab a bit of paper, and a pen, and just note down what's what's important there, like what does it do random, is it mostly front facing, etc., that kind of thing. Okay, before we finish, we are going to go over 2 hours, and there's nothing I can do about that. We're going to take a really brief look through the resources. So the Gorm is a higher quality resource provider than the White Lion. It's actually a really, really high quality resource provider, and that is because it has multiple of these multi-category resources, and that is super useful. Resources that cover multiple categories, especially monster resources, are amazing because not only can they be used on like a wide variety of different things, but they're also very nice for patterns, because patterns require node monster X type resources, and so they cover a lot. So I'm going to walk through them briefly and highlight the gear that I think is really good to craft with each. I'm not going to go into detail about the gear, I'm just going to mention it by name and maybe a brief sentence about it. If you want more details on that, the Gorm and You video, that's the one you can check. Hopefully I've remembered to put a link in the description. If not, it's on the main video on the channel, the main channel page. There's a playlist for all of the And You videos right there. So first of all, Mammoth Hand. There's 2 of them, makes sense, there's 2 hands. This is a bone, hide, and an organ, so this is better than the question mark resource from the basic resource deck. That's rare that you get something that is absolutely strictly better. This is your first one you should use to make a knuckle shield if you get it early in the campaign. Knuckle shields are shields, really good. Then we have 2 jiggling lard. We already saw one of these can be produced by a critical wound. This is an organ and a hide, that's really nice. You can make a Greater Gax with them. Greater Gax is like a really good weapon that will last you a fairly nice time. It's got reach, so it's great for hunting Gorms. It's deadly, you know. It's got a nice barbed, perfect hit ability, a good stat range. All fantastic. Then we have the Meaty Rib. Again, we've got 2 of those. It's a bone and an organ. You can make the Rib Blade with it. The Rib Blade is categorically one of the best weapons for crafting cost in the entire game. It is a one-handed grand weapon. It's got deadly, it's got 5 strength, it's slow, who cares? It's amazing. It's really, really good. We have a handed skull. There's 2 things a handed skull is used for. The Gorm Mask, and later in the campaign, when you want to make a black sword, you need a handed skull. So, like many skulls, it's very valuable, and there's only one in the deck. Stout vertebrae, less valuable, but you can make armor spikes, which is worth it quite often because this is a fairly hard to get affinity, and you may want to combine them in this manner when activating the Gorm set if you've chosen to build that armor set despite its shortcomings. Dense bone, that's part of crafting the Greater Gax, otherwise just kind of a basic bone. Acid gland, as I mentioned earlier in the video, generally I want 2 of these. That's because 1 of these and 3 bones is used to make the Acid Tooth Dagger. Acid Tooth Dagger is one of the weapons I will always try and use paired. It's absolutely fantastic. It's one of my favourite daggers. I will often combine it with Cyclone Scale Armour from the Sunstalker in order to make it last as long as possible. I know, sweetheart, you have to wait. We're nearly done, okay? She's going to start talking at me in a minute if I'm not careful, but we're nearly there. Okay, then we have the Gorm Brain. Nothing specific for crafting this, but it is used to upgrade and directly innovate your Gorm Alchemy innovations. I always spend the Gorm Brains on that. Any way of getting innovations out of the innovation deck that doesn't require you to spend your 1 per year innovation is really good. And the Gorm Chemist potions, like the things you can craft from them, need these innovations to get there, so it's really good to spend them there. I would absolutely spend each brain upgrading my way through that, through all of that tech tree every time. Milky Eye, as mentioned, you need the active thyroid down here. You can make to be able to use it, so you need that critical wound. Milky Eye is used to make this pulse lantern, which is just an incredibly strong item that has offensive purposes. Near the end of a showdown, you can go for the kill by knocking the monster down and then getting in and cracking the heck out of it. If this doesn't manage to do anything, well, it doesn't inflict the -1 accuracy token, that's okay. It has a reasonable affinity here that you might find quite useful in some builds. And it's a lantern, which is great for people with lantern. This is a very strong lantern. You just need to time it right. Don't pop this too early, because the less attacks you make at -1 accuracy, the better. Stout Kidney, this is used in crafting certain important things, so it's just there, but the specific items come in later. Stout Heart, you can make the Gorn. The Gorn is currently the only non-noisy instrument. We expect that to change. It has a nice once per showdown ability that can provide some armor points and get people standing up. The main reason I like using it, again, is this affinity. But I do expect to stop using this very much once noisy lands on it in campaigns to death, which will be a shame, but it is what it is. Stout Hide, there are 4 of these, and it's worth mentioning there are 2 Stout Hearts, by the way. The Gorm has 2 hearts. Stout Hide, 4 of these, and they're used for constructing Gorm armor. Gormite, we talked about how you get this either from Gorm Chemie or from fighting the level 3 Gorm sometimes, and just makes the black sword, which is like an end game sword. Really good sword. Stomach lining, this comes specifically from the rewards of the level 3 Gorm, and used them with the regeneration suit, which is part of upgrading Gorm armor, and just a really good accessory for a whole bunch of builds. Pure Bulb, this is the Death Blow, resource. You can make the Riot Mace with this. Riot Mace is close to being just one of the best clubs in the entire game. Not only does it have a decent stat profile and deadly, but also it forces monsters down onto their basic actions, which is incredibly powerful. Many monsters are just ruined by being pushed to their basic actions. Very strong, and because it's a club, you can use it with lantern armor, so it's viable all campaign. Active thyroid already mentioned. And then we've got these two indomitable resources. This is from Morg? No? Yeah, Morg? What's his name? It is Morg. It's Greatest Axe Morg. Yeah, Greatest Axe Morg. Just a fantastic axe. I've talked about that a lot in the review video. I think it's very good. And then Impacted Gusk from the Indomitable Survivor Groomery box. Can be used to make Gusk knives. You're going to need 2 of them if you want to use it paired. It is worth using paired. So that's it. And the big reasons to hunt the Gorm are not just these selection of gear, which has some incredibly strong items and weapons amongst it, and the Gorm Chemist innovation line, but also it has a high quality selection of resources. If you just need monster resources for patterns, that Node 1 patterns, Era 1 patterns, or you just need in general monsters that drop resources that are very flexible, the Gorm is a fantastic choice to hunt. And that's it. And that's it. Pens down. Thank you very much for listening, and a big thank you to all of my patrons who make these videos possible. That is it for our talk about the Gorm, and we can close this chapter until I inevitably do a recording run of hunting the Gorm at some point, maybe sometime in the future when I can fit it in. Next time we return to this series, we're going to be looking at the Screaming Antelope. Until then, have a good one, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!